The age-old question that every home hobbyist faces. Just get the cheap Harbor Freight unit or spend a bit extra? Let's examine a couple of different file belt sanders and see what the answer is in this case. Make sure you watch till the end because there's a twist ending and it's definitely something that you want to know. Now, file belt sanders are one of those tools that I didn't even know existed a few months ago, but are quickly becoming one of my favorite tools. Most of them use a 1/2 inch wide 18-inch circumference sanding belt, and it allows you to reach areas that aren't reachable by most tools, and it does come in handy when you want to carefully grind down sheet metal to release a weld, like a spot weld. So let's take a look at the Harbor Freight unit first, which is less than $40 with the use of their ever available 20% off coupon. This is a corded unit and it's not a complicated tool. There's a switch to turn it on and off, and it comes with a sanding belt pre-installed, which is nice, but it doesn't really matter because if you're using this to grind metal, you'll need another one pretty fast. So go ahead and also pick up a pack of replacement sanding belts when you're picking this up. The neck rotates out from a folded position, and you use this plastic knob here to lock it in place once you have it at the angle that you want. One thing that I noticed about this rotating neck is that no matter how hard I tighten this knob, the neck really wants to rotate if you press it down moderately hard. And you can really only hand tighten it so much because the knob is plastic and I can't really go gorilla on it without risking breaking it. But this really didn't turn out to be a huge issue because you can just place your other hand at the back of the neck and use that position to apply pressure if needed. Now there's another knob up here to adjust the belt to sit squarely on the tip of the roller, which is kind of a nice feature, but once I had it dialed in, I didn't find much reason to play with it while I was working. My biggest complaint with this tool is actually how annoying it is to change out belts. It comes with an Allen wrench, which I hate because I always lose these, and you have to use it to remove the protective plate to get to the roller in the back, and after removing the cover, you twist another plastic knob at the back to release the tension, and you can take out the sanding belt, and after you put in the new one, rotate the knob back and replace the plate. It might not seem that bad, but if you're quickly eating through these belts because you have 100 spot welds to get to, it does get kind of annoying. Now, there's this button right here that I really can't tell why it exists, mostly because it's not even labeled in the manual. But from what I can tell, it just locks the rollers from spinning, but I don't really know why that would be useful. Maybe it's just to make replacing belts easier, but who knows. The build quality of this thing is just fine for a $40 tool. My main complaints are the weak plastic knobs that I'm sure will break sooner or later, and after using it for a little while I noticed that some screws were coming loose that I have to tighten every now and then, but for a cheap Harbor Freight tool it's not bad. We'll test how it performs in a bit, but let's take a quick look at its competitor first. So this is the Astro Pneumatic 3037 file belt sander, which goes for about 90 bucks on Amazon. It is more than twice as expensive as the Harbor Freight unit. Now, this isn't the most expensive thing out there. You can find some 3M units that go for insane prices, but for the home hobbyist, this is still very much within reason. It is air-powered, which means it's not really a direct competitor to the Harbor Freight electric plug-in unit, but I thought I'd compare this one just to show some feature differences. It also has a rotating neck and comes with an Allen wrench to lock it in place, and like I said before, I hate having to need Allen wrenches, but it does work really pretty well in this case. The neck locks in place very firmly, and it won't rotate if you don't want it to. And unlike the Harbor Freight unit, this also comes with a speed controller, which I'll kind of demonstrate later once I get this hooked up. I basically only use it on the high speed setting anyway, but I guess the adjustability could be nice for some users. But what I love most about this unit over the Harbor Freight one is how easy and satisfying it is to switch out the belts. Instead of fumbling around with a protective plate and trying to figure out where the hell you left the Allen wrench, you simply press on the end here to compress the neck. You take out and replace the belt and then push a small lever to just pop it in place. Now, I know this doesn't seem like a big deal, but trust me, it's a big plus. That's all there is to it, really. There's no other buttons, switches, or knobs. The build quality is pretty solid. There are some plastics, but overall it feels very sturdy and balanced. Alright, so that's enough talk. Let's actually pit these against each other and see how well they do. To make sure we have a fair comparison, we're going to equip them both with brand new 80 grit belts and measure the time that it takes to eat through a 14 gauge square tubing. This isn't a complicated tool, so it's not a complicated test. We'll try the Harbor Freight unit first, and stop the clock when we can actually see a hole. And it looks like with a brand new 80 grit belt, it took about 40 seconds to get the job done. Now we'll try it one more time to make sure that it's a consistent result, and there. Took basically the same amount of time. About 40 seconds for both attempts, considering that I'm starting the clock a little bit early and stopping it a little bit late. Now let's try the Astro Pneumatic tool operating at 90 psi. That's what the manual dictates, by the way. I'm using a 28-gallon 200 psi compressor, which, you know, it's not a beast, but it's a reasonably sized unit, especially if I'm only using this for short bursts. As you can see, you can adjust the speed of the tool, but we'll just use the highest speed setting and see how it does. And quite surprisingly, at least to me, it actually takes longer than the Harbor Freight unit to do the same job. And I know this thing uses a ton of air, and maybe it needs at least a 60-gallon compressor and more CFM to do it justice, but after double checking the line pressure at 90 psi, this is a bit of a surprising result. We'll try it one more time, but the time measured was pretty much still the same, safely over a minute. So I don't actually know if this would perform any better if it had a much bigger compressor powering it, but I think the results still speak for themselves if you are like the most of us and you don't have a monster compressor bolted to the floor of your garage. Now, if you made it this far, I want to let you in on a little secret. Whether you choose the Harbor Freight unit or the Astro Pneumatic unit, both actually work fine, and the choice might ultimately be up to personal preference. One is cheaper, both in price and build quality, and the other is more expensive but is better built, will probably last longer, and in my experience is actually kind of easier on the hands if you hold it for a long time, although you'll need a big compressor to power one. But what actually is more important is what sanding belt you choose, and I'm not talking about just grits. Check this out. This is the 3M Cubitron 60 grit 10 belt set, and it's not cheap. It's about $2 a belt, which is roughly 3 to 4 times more expensive than the generic sanding belts that you can find on Amazon or Harbor Freight, but trust me, this is well worth the money. You probably can't tell the difference on camera, but if you kind of feel it, it's actually much thicker than a generic sanding belt, and in my experience it'll last at least 2 to 3 times longer, and it won't fray as easily around the edges. But what's really impressive is its cutting performance. So let's put it on the Harbor Freight unit and see how much of a difference it makes on the test. And holy crap, it cut down the time in half. And to be fair, a tiny bit of this is the difference between a 60 grit and an 80 grit band, but it does show that what's probably more important than the machine is your choice of the belt. Let's try that one more time. And yep, you can eat through this tubing in less than 20 seconds. Really impressive. But just for fun, let's put it on the pneumatic tool now and see how much faster that becomes. Again, this is slightly longer than the Harbor Freight unit, but yeah, again, this Cubitron got the job done in half the time, going from more than a minute to less than 30 seconds. So what are the takeaways here? I say go ahead and buy the Harbor Freight unit. There's nothing wrong with it, and it'll get the job done. In fact, it might even be better than the much more expensive pneumatic versions if you don't have a giant air compressor. Now, it's not built to last years of heavy use, but you already knew that. But the most important thing is don't cheap out on the sanding belts because it'll supercharge whichever one you choose to go with. Alright, that's it. I hope you guys found that useful. Go ahead and give me a thumbs up if you found this helpful. In any case, I'll see you guys next time.